Hello, buenas noches, buenas tardes, buenos dias, where you are in the world. It is Tuesday night, and I should have gone live about 30 minutes ago, so please forgive my tardiness, but I am here, and that's what's important. And you are here, so thank you to the folks who have joined me live. Thank you to the folks who are watching this on the replay. Um, it's been a week and it's only Tuesday. Last week, Ivana, my co-host for Reclaim the Retreat, joined me, and we talked about ways that you could preserve your peace, protect your peace, because as we discovered last week, the current regime in the US is going to be challenging for many of us in many different ways. And I was all determined to come talk to y'all about something different tonight, but this is a topic that has been on my mind. So I thought I would share it here. If you are new and you're like, well, what is she going on about? What does she talk about on this channel? Hello, welcome. My name is Adelia Aborshade. I left the United States about 8.5 years ago, and honestly, I've never looked back. I've lived in 4 different countries. Um, I am a financial confidence coach and a retreat host by day, but I also share the work that I do, the life that I live, my travels, all of that kind of stuff I share here on this channel. So welcome. We're glad you're here. Um, and so sometimes I talk about money. Sometimes I talk about travel, and sometimes I talk about life abroad, and sometimes we talk about all of that and then some, because where those things intersect is really, really my specialty. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about um, living abroad. And I know that right now where a lot of us, that's probably, if you're new, how you found this channel. We have a lot of videos on this channel about how to move abroad. I have interviews with all sorts of Black women about their experiences living abroad, good, bad, in between. And so we're going to talk about that because let's be real, with the state of things in the United States, there has been a decided increase in interest in the possibility of spending some time outside the US. I mentioned this in a previous video that, like, the day of the election or the day after, they saw searches for how to move abroad and things related to that go up like 1,000%, 1,500%. So I know there's a lot more interest in it. And while we are going to do everything we can to protect our peace as we endure what is to come, um, for some of us, that means leaving the United States. But I didn't want to just talk about, like, oh, this is how you can leave. This is how you get a job. This is what you can do if you don't have a lot of money, because I've made videos on all of that. So please check out the playlist on this channel. There's a lot of helpful uh, content there for how to move abroad. Additionally, I have a free move abroad checklist. The link has changed. My bid links don't work anymore. Oh, this is not the right one. Give me a second, y'all, because my cable is a little loose, so I don't want to jiggle the computer too much. Here we go. But as I was saying, while I'm trying to do two things at one time, which I'm very not talented enough to do, um, but I have a free move abroad checklist. I just dropped the link in the chat. The link is also in the description of this video. So if you are here because leaving the US is heavy on your heart, go ahead, grab the checklist. I think you will find it very helpful, not only in helping you prepare to make your move, but also helping you think of things that maybe you hadn't considered as a part of that move. What I want to talk to y'all tonight about is kind of like leaving isn't enough. And, you know, I am not trying to be alarmist. That really isn't my nature. However, anybody who knows me will tell you that I'm very big on having information and planning and thinking about the logistics and not getting caught flat-footed and that sort of thing. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Um, as we know, a lot of folks, a lot of us are thinking about maybe for the first time leaving the United States. And there are a lot of great reasons to do that. I've talked on more than one occasion about the fact that leaving just because you want to be someplace that has a lower cost of living. If that's the only reason you leaving, I'm gonna need you to rethink that because you need to have more skin in the game than just a low cost of living. But for a lot of us right now, we are feeling unsafe, like physically unsafe, feeling like we could be the victims of violence by being in the United States for many of reasons. State sanctioned violence against Black bodies. Um, Many of you might live in states that have open carry laws. There's a lot of violence in the United States. So you might be feeling like your physical safety is threatened. You might want to leave the US because you're hoping to find some psychological safety, environmental safety, emotional safety. That is fine. I am not trying to rain on anybody's parade, but I think we need to think a little bit broader than that. That might be the like immediate thing that is like pressing you to consider leaving the US right now. Okay. And ain't nothing wrong with that. Um, as we know, or as we have been reminded, because we've seen this administration, we saw it 8 years ago. Here we are 8 years later, and I guess you could say the gloves are off, particularly over the last week. We've seen that this administration doesn't really give a damn about like what the rules are, what are the traditions, the previous precedents, like like this isn't how we do things. They don't really care. And particularly the use of executive orders for things that executive orders aren't really supposed to do. We've seen a lot of new policies for government organizations and entities. We've seen new policies be sent to them, but those policies are, I think, purposely vaguely worded so that the implementation of them could be in a way to cause the most damage to people like us. Um, and so, with what I've seen over the last week, I really got to thinking about how leaving isn't enough to make you safe. We cannot take anything for granted. There are no, there's nothing is sacred. to this administration. You know, I would have thought that the equal opportunity, what is it, EEO? I would have thought that that was sacrosanct and that was not something we touched. And I learned, like all of you, that no, there is nothing sacred to these people. So that's where I'm coming from with this idea that just leaving the US isn't going to be enough to make you safe. Now, in case you are new here, let me remind you of something. When I say safe, remember, safety is an illusion. We are not safe anywhere, particularly because we are Black women. Women are not safe anywhere. Black people are not safe anywhere. So that's why I say, safe in quotes. Okay. So safety is an illusion and we're not safe anywhere. But because I'm not trying to be a downer tonight, but there are some things that we can do to like minimize or hopefully minimize issues we face while we're abroad. So that's what we're talking about. And so I see there are a few people in the chat who are at that point where they're considering a move. If there are some concerns that you have, please drop them in the chat and we'll try and talk about them. Uh, okay. I'm just going back through the chat to see if I missed anything, and I don't think I did. Okay, so if my argument is that just leaving the US, just getting out of the United States isn't going to make you safe, what would? I think one of maybe the biggest thing you can do to further the possibility that you could be relatively safe while you are abroad is to do everything in your power to make sure that you have a legal status in your host country. And I know for a lot of folks, they're like, I need to be gone right now. I got a US passport. I know that there are a lot of countries that I can be there 180 days without a visa. I got to go. I cannot take being in the US. I get it. I understand. But the reality of the world we live in is that it pops off the tourist, like if you're there as a tourist, um, you don't really have any rights to stay in that place. We saw some of this when at the height of like the COVID lockdowns. If you were in a country with a tourist visa or you were trying to get somewhere else and you were going to be entering as a tourist, you really didn't have rights. They could say, um, we don't want people from this country coming in, and then you really have no rights. I've mentioned before, I got I am a permanent resident in Mexico. I initially got residency in Mexico with a work visa when I lived here in 2017, 2018, but I moved to Asia. My work visa expired. And so on my summer break, I was like, I'm going to end up in Mexico again at some point. Why don't I just go ahead and get residency, qualify through financial solvency, and then not have to worry about it? This was in the summer of 2019. Well, lo and behold, come January, February of 2020, a lot of countries, due to the pandemic, were closing their borders. And I tell you what, because I had no interest, since I left the United States in 2016, I have not had any interest in returning there to live. And I know there were a lot of people that I worked with or I knew that had been abroad that found themselves back in the US and were kind of stuck because countries were not letting in non-residents. And so I knew that when my contract was up in China and I was ready to go, I didn't have to worry about it because I would be able to get into Mexico because I have residency. So I am not trying to say don't bother with a tourist visa, but I want to make sure that everybody understands that if you are in a country on a tourist visa, you have very little staying power should something pop off. Um, that's that's what I'm saying. So that means looking at what are longer stay options if that's a place that you want to stay in. Now, if you are like, no, I want to move through the world as a digital nomad, just know that in the these are all my opinions based off of my experience, my lived experience, and what I have observed. If you choose to continue as a digital nomad, um, and when I say a digital nomad, I'm talking about somebody who is bopping around, not staying in a single country more than a couple of months. And I'm in this instance, I'm not talking about somebody who has applied specifically for a digital nomad visa. That's a separate conversation. If you're going to kind of be like an informal digital nomad, a slow traveler, what have you, just know that that kind of existence right now, there's some risk to it that didn't really, there's more risk to it now than we had previously. And so that is something to consider. But I implore everyone to it, particularly if it is a country that you know want to spend significant time in. I don't think being a I have always thought being a Black person and being reliant on making a visa run, and that's when my tourist visa has expired. I need to dip out of this country, go to another country, and then come back in so my tourist visa will reset. I've always thought that was uh, a very insecure path for melanated folks because global anti-blackness is a thing. When and if they start to crack down, we tend to be the obvious foreigners, the easy people to point fingers at and say, hey, that person isn't supposed to be here. So by not having a proper visa, you have already putting yourself in a vulnerable space. Now, luckily, we do live in a time where digital nomad visas are a thing. And I want you to really, really consider that. I think there is a lot of misinformation about digital nomad visas. And so I'll probably do a separate video on that. I think there is an assumption that you have to have a lot of income. That really depends on the country. And I think there are some who believe that you must have a remote job to qualify for a digital nomad visa. Not necessarily, particularly if you are a can't talk tonight, a freelancer. Um, that works a lot of places. A digital nomad visa is not like I want to live here for the rest of my life, but it does give you somewhere between a year and usually 3 years without renewing, permission to be there in case there is backlash against the US, as Dr. O is concerned about. And it's definitely something that is on my mind, because you know, I think it's only logical and reasonable to assume that other countries are only going to take so much from this current US administration before they consider what are their options to retaliate. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be personally against us, but as is the case in the United States, we are a vulnerable group, and we often are the first ones to suffer when there's a problem. So that's what I mean by, like, if you want to be safe, or as safe as you can be as you are moving into another country, make sure you have permission to be there, so that if it comes to them rounding up folks, because we went through that here in Mexico. I know Mexico has a reputation for being, like, very flexible about the enforcement of rules and laws and that sort of thing. But probably, was it 3 years ago, when there were immigration checkpoints where you could not buy a bus ticket in this country without showing your papers that you have proof to be here? There's still, even though it has been illegal, there are still times when uh, officers pull over buses and ask certain folks, to prove that they are supposed to be here. And if you can't prove that you are here with the proper paperwork, or that you haven't overstayed your visa, you got sent to detention. So it can happen. And I just want us to be prepared in case it does. It may never happen, which would be great. It could be that, folks in other countries, particularly because we are Black, and they know that we are a historically marginalized group, they may make assumptions about, like, why we're there, and that we don't agree with the current administration. And who knows, we might get shown some grace that we might not have otherwise. So that's one thing I want you to do to make sure that you are safer outside of the US, is to make sure that you have proper legal status. Um, Something else I want you to do is handle your business when it comes to your taxes. Now, if you are a US citizen, that means you have a US passport, or you have a US green card. You are obligated, doesn't matter where you live, to file federal income taxes. And this is not the time to shirk that responsibility. Now, for the vast majority of us, we probably won't have to pay US federal income tax, because we can use something like the foreign earned income exclusion. Some people can use the foreign, what is the other one? There's the FEIE, and then the foreign tax exemption. I can't remember that one because I usually can't use it, so I don't remember. But there are ways that are completely legal and above board that would reduce your tax liability to the US federal government to probably zero. But you still got to file the paperwork. Okay. We don't want to give any reason uh, to be scrutinized more than we already are. In particular, what I have noticed in some of the more recent announcements and proclamations of the current administration in the US, there seems to be this belief that there is, like, massive government waste, and they're looking for ways to save money. And yes, we know that the US government has not always been good about how it's appropriating spending and that sort of thing. But what I have noticed with this administration is they're not necessarily looking for, like, fraud and overspending. They're looking for the low hanging fruit. And if it comes down to you or some one percenter, it's a whole lot easier to go after you. See what I'm saying? And yes, doctor, you are 100%. If you are in arrears on your federal taxes, they can void your passport, and then you can't travel anywhere. You can't get a new one until then. In addition to, like, if you actually do owe taxes and you don't, you can go to jail. So make sure you are handling your business and filing your US federal tax return. If you are domiciled in a state in the United States that has state income tax, make sure that you are compliant there. That way, there is no funny business. But also, make sure you understand what, if any, tax obligations you have in your host country. I know that some people often try to like avoid having to pay taxes, and that's one of the reasons that they adopt a digital nomad lifestyle, or they try to be nomadic, because in a lot of places, um, unlike the US, where you are always a tax resident, you never get to not be. In a lot of other countries, whether or not you are considered a tax resident has to do with how much time you are physically in the country. If you have a US passport, it does not matter if you have not been physically in the US for the last 10 years, you still are obligated to file a tax return. That is not true for a lot of other countries. And so some people think, oh, if as long as I'm not in the country for more than 183 days, I'm not a tax resident. That's not always true. So I want to make sure that you are aware that you need to find out what are the rules, what makes you a tax resident in the country, in your host country. Particularly if you are spending more than 6 months in that country, you absolutely need to look into that. But there are some places where you become a tax resident. It's not tied to how much time you spend in the country. It's tied to the activity you're engaging in. It all varies. So make sure that you are aware of that and compliant, because again, you don't want to draw attention, unwanted negative scrutiny to yourself, um, if you can avoid it. Okay. Marking some of y'all's questions so I can come back. Okay. I'm trying to do this with one hand. It's very difficult. Okay, so bear with me. I appreciate y'all bearing with me. Okay, I'll take this question right now. So to be clear, permanent residency or digital nomad visas are the way to go. Maybe. I have permanent residency in Mexico. Mexico also offers temporary residency. Um, Mexico offers this, but most people don't go this route. But a lot of countries have student visas. It's not really about which visa you have. It's about making sure you have one that gives you the right to be in the country. A tourist visa, if you actually have one, because technically Mexico does not issue a tourist visa to US Americans. You are here as a tourist, but you don't really get a visa. That's why I say being here that way is very insecure, because you're supposed to be here on vacation. So if shit pops off, why are you trying to stay? You're on vacation, go home. That could be the thinking. So it's not necessarily you need a digital nomad visa or a permanent residency visa. Do need a visa that gives you the permission to be in that country for some stated amount of time. That could be a student visa. That could be, like, I know Portugal has this, I know Germany has it, where you can, like, a job seeker visa. They may call it something different, but the idea is the same. The idea is, here, you can come to this country for this amount of time so that you can find a job. And then if you find a job, then you get transitioned into a more long-term visa. So that's what's important, is that you are not simply there as a tourist, because as a tourist, you have very, very few rights, as far as like staying. Because I'm assuming for this conversation, we're looking to be out of the US and not go back. And so if you are in a place as a tourist, that is the least secure way that you can be there. So that's why I say that. Um, okay, so we covered your legal status. We talked about taxes. Um, I don't know that this one gets talked about a whole lot, but I think it is very important. Maybe because I am a retired social studies, history, economics, geography teacher, but I think particularly for the folks who are looking to live someplace long term. Okay, you are relocating long term, be it Panama, um, because of their pensionado visa scheme, which is really, really great. You don't need a lot of money. There are a lot of perks. But I think it is important that you have at least a prime, like a primer level knowledge of history in that place. In particular, I'm thinking about like Panama, because the president of the United States has said several things about seizing the Panama Canal. And I think if you understand the history of Panama, you understand that's not so far-fetched. Yes, the United States was responsible for the building of the canal, and eventually we turned over control of it, but we turned over control of the canal with strings. So it is not, in my opinion, it is not super far-fetched that there could be U.S. military action on the Panama Canal. I am not saying it's gonna happen, but I'm saying there is absolutely historical precedent for it. So I would suggest that you have some idea of the history of the country that you're in. In particular, I would say, what are some of the historical prejudices that have existed? What's their history with the United States? Like here in Mexico, I just finished reading a book about the last Mexican emperor who was put in power by the French. And the United States was like, nah, we ain't having that. If y'all don't get him out of there, we will come get him out of there. This is after two previous times that Mexico had been invaded by the US. So I think it's important to understand, are there some long-term running, not disagreements, but like countries with which your host country has bad blood? What's their history with the US? Are you in a place where the US has proven on more than one occasion that they don't give a damn about the rule of law or respecting their sovereignty, that sort of thing, as well as understanding who have been traditional, who they've been in alliance with, and who've been their enemies. What are some historical prejudices? As I was looking at other places where I might want to have residency, some places came up on the list, but given some of the geopolitical things that have happened in the last couple of years and their history with Russia, some of those places I have had to take off my list because sort of the the amount of rope Russia has been given toward Ukraine, like seizing Crimea. Basically, the international community didn't do anything. They're in this war with Ukraine. and they were sanctioned, but nobody's really taking any kind of military effort. We now have uh, that man who we know has some, who, what do we even call his relationship with Russia, that whereas the US previously would have been seen as somebody who might stop Russian aggression, I don't know that that's something we can count on. So if I was looking at Poland, um, Hungary. I mean, there are other reasons I probably wouldn't move to Hungary, but if I was like looking at Poland or one of the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, I might really rethink that because I don't know that there's anybody to keep Russian aggression in check. And yes, I would add Georgia to that list. So that's what I'm saying. I think it is good to have some knowledge of what, at least, like modern history, the 19th, 20th century, so that as things start to play out, you can kind of see like, oh, this sounds like this other thing that happened before, or historically, this country and this country, this has not been a good thing. I think that's something that you can do, because I think, what is it? What's the saying? Forewarned is something. I think having the background information helps you if you've got to make, you know, s- split second decisions. I think having that background information can be a lot more useful to you as like being caught unawares. Okay? That's my thinking on this. Um I'd also suggest um having some idea, and again, y'all, I am not talking about these things to be a fear monger. Actually, thank you, Shamika. Forewarned is forearmed. I'm not talking about this to be a fear monger, but one of the things I have noticed as a student of history is that a lot of people aren't. So, where I have been seeing patterns repeating themselves for the last 6 years, a lot of folks haven't. So, I want us to be ready, to have our knees bent in case something happens. And here's the thing, we don't know what all is possible. I think that is the thing that has been driven home to me over the last week. I'm not going to say I learned it in the last week, but I will say that is the thing that has been driven home to me in the last week, is that anything can happen. There are no sacred cows. Yes, I cannot tell you, as a history person reading that book, oh my gosh, I got so many things to say. Um, but yes, so I would also kind of be thinking about, okay, so if the shit hits the fan and I can't be here anymore and I don't want to go to the US, where would I go? Hopefully you never have to put that plan into action, but I think having some ideas ahead of time will make your life easier if it actually comes down to it. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that this will 100% save you, but it's better to have some ideas kicking around in your head versus being caught completely unawares and be scrambling trying to think of where you could go. So I think that is an important thing that you should do. Let me see if we're going to take these questions. Okay. So we'll take the questions. I got one or two more things on my list, then I'll take the questions that I see. Um, Now, this is something that I had not done, but I thought about it the other day. And I thought about it again today when I found out that all federal grants and loans as of 5 p.m. were put on hold. Um, if you are somebody who rents out a house in the US and your tenant was on Section 8, you might not get paid next month. Like there's kind of been this stoppage on all of these government programs where people are supposed to get paid. And so I got to thinking, okay, what if, because I'm not 100%, I've heard different things. I'm not 100% sure where this administration puts Americans who live abroad. Are we seen collectively, all of us, no matter our color, are we seen as okay, or do they see us as a threat? And so I thought about, well, what if for some reason there was an executive order about not allowing uh, ATM cards or credit cards to be used outside the US or something like that, like for national security or something like that. And so it got me wondering, like, okay, if I could not access my money in the US, what would I do? So my thought, and I think this is a good idea, it's just not something I'd ever done, is you want to make sure that you've got some kind of cash reserve in your host country. Now, I am lazy and I don't want to do a lot of work. So I am not going to tell you open foreign bank account, stash money in these different places. I'm not telling you that, but I think at minimum, you should, because it could be like, wasn't it Capital One that just had a situation where nobody could access their bank accounts and the credit cards didn't work? It could be a situation like that, which really didn't have anything to do with the current administration. But I think having some cash, physical cash, stashed away where you are is not a bad idea, because depending on what pops off and I live in a city that gets earthquakes. There've been several major earthquakes, and I can tell you I was here for the September 19th quake in 2017. You were not able, at least for a little while, to do things on your phone, that sort of thing. Cell service was not great. I didn't try to go get cash, but I'm going to guess that I probably couldn't have gotten cash at that time. So having a stash of cash, um, but not gold coins. I am never telling you that gold coins are a good idea, but having some cash on hand. I know we've gotten Having plastic is really convenient. Using your cell phone to pay for things has gotten really convenient, but I think we're living in uncertain times. So I think having some hard cash, and I'm not saying stockpile tens of thousands of dollars. I'm not saying that. But if you got to make some moves, uh, I'm going to bet cash will be king, particularly if you've got to do that and there's either some kind of emergency or you have a sense of urgency because something else stupid has happened. So okay, so I would definitely look at that. um Now, I will say, maybe I just mentioned that and that got you to thinking about, oh, I should have bank accounts in different currencies in different countries. That's a choice. Something I want you to think about is, if you go that route, make sure that you are FATCA compliant, because previous administrations have been very concerned about overseas Americans trying to hide money from the government. And if you have more than $10,000 in foreign bank accounts, not a single account, collectively, you've got to file FATCA because they want to know where that money is. Yes, y'all are right. have cash reserves, even if you in the US. I think that would be a good move, because we've seen what happens when there is a major tech outage, and it's not great. Now, Tracy, for me, I'd have pesos, because let me tell you, if I had to get out of town quickly, nobody wants my dollars. They want pesos. Um, but I live in Mexico City. That might be different. Let's say you lived on the border. Um, that might be different. But for me in Mexico City, don't nobody want no dollars. They want pesos. Um, okay. So one of the questions I saw, because let's talk about this. I think this is an issue for folks in the US as well as those outside of it. For those of us outside the US, Mexico in my case, you recommend we now always have our passports on us. Um, I would recommend that you have some kind of ID. I I don't like carrying, well, I'm not gonna say I don't like carrying my passport, because where was I recently? Oh, I was in the US, I was in Alaska, and I was in Washington State, and I actually did have my passport on me, but it's because it was in the bag. In Mexico, I used to carry my residency card, because particularly if you have residency, that's the document you need to be carrying, is the one that shows, see, I'm supposed to be here. But let's say you don't have residency. If you are in Mexico, let's say things started to operate the way they did about 3 years ago. We have not heard anything of the sort, but let's say it did. Um, you would need to have proof that you were within your allotted days. So most people would show that by showing the stamp in their passport or the FMM card. They don't really give out FMMs anymore. So you should carry around your passport. I will tell you, in Mexico, and I imagine this is true in other places, do not make a color copy of your passport. In Mexico, that is considered a counterfeit document and will get you arrested. Um, so for me in Mexico, I always used to carry my residency card, because that's what showed I was supposed to be here. And then I lost my residency card and I had to jump through so many stupid hoops to get a new one. And I said, never again. And that is why I got my Mexico City driver's license. And that is what I carry around, because you can't get a driver's license unless you have residency. Now on my phone, I have pictures of my residency card front and back. I have pictures of the photo page of my passport, but I personally don't carry those around with me. When I am in a country that that I don't have residency in, depends how repressive and authoritarian the government is. That's generally how I decide whether or not I'm gonna carry my passport with me. Um, so yeah, I saw somebody mentioned a passport card. I have one, but here's my concern, is that if I am encountering some form of law enforcement who, yeah, they know what a passport looks like, but they don't speak English, they don't read English. Will they know what a passport card is? Because outside of US land borders, I don't know that whatever law enforcement I came into contact with would recognize and know what a passport card is. So I got it, but so far I haven't really used it for anything. Okay. Um, can you get a license with temporary residency? I assume this question is about Mexico. Yes. Now, what laws are in other countries, that I do not know. Ba, 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 ba. I don't know if you've already gotten your passport. I don't know if you can just get a card by itself. I can tell you that when you renew, well, I renewed my passport in person. I left that day with the passport, but the passport card came in the mail about a month or two later. Okay. Um, let's see. I think there was another question here. This is an interesting question. I love the idea of Black women being well positioned to live our best lives regardless of the current administration. What's your strategic plan to flourish? This is a little bit about what we talked about last week about protecting our peace and, disengaging from the media and embrace leaning into our hobbies, leaning into spending time outside, those kinds of things. I have never been this productive with my sewing as I have been the last couple of weeks, probably because of that. Um, for me, because I guess you asked me this question, my strategic plan to flourish is to not return to the United States. That's my plan. Um, was it yesterday, um, the latest episode of Flourish in the Foreign came out, and it's an interview with me, and guess what it was about? Aging abroad. Because, like I said, my plan is never to go back. So that means I have to rethink a lot of the assumptions I made about what aging would look like because I'm not gonna be in the United States, I'm gonna be somewhere else, probably Mexico. Okay. All right. All right. I don't see any more questions here. If you've got any questions, drop those. Remember that if you need, if you're like just starting at the beginning of your journey, trying to figure out what's what as as it applies to um, your move abroad. Remember, I have a free move abroad checklist. There is a link in the description. The links have changed. I also to encourage you, if you are not already um, on Um, I ain't never been on TikTok. So TikTok getting banned ain't really impact me, but it reminded me how important it is that if there is a community or there are people, creators that you want to be connected to, we got to make sure that we are connected outside of these platforms. Because while I've been hanging out here on YouTube, oh wow, it's 4 years. February is going to make 4 years. I don't own YouTube, and so the only way to for sure stay connected with me, no matter what happens, is to make sure you're on the mailing list. And so if you're not, there is this link is in the description. Make sure you and do that. Um, Adelia, do you go back to vote? Buy material. Um, I have previously done that. I actually have a day in the life from the last time I went back to vote that I did not publish before the election, and now it's months later. And I'm still on the fence of should I publish this or not. But I had previously done that. I don't know that I will continue to do that. Um, I'd never go to the US to buy fabric. It's more of the companies that I buy from will ship for free to the US. as opposed to what it costs me to get it shipped here to Mexico. So I will often go to pick up fabric I've ordered online. I don't anticipate doing that at all. I really it's very unfortunate because I have 3 grandchildren who I would like to hang out with, but I don't think we gonna be hanging out there. I think they are going to have to come where I am. So, I do have a trip to Texas in March, and I don't anticipate going back. Other than to pick up the grandkids, I don't anticipate going back. I don't think it's a safe place for me. Okay, love this question. Currently on sabbatical, do not want to return to the US. Are there any options for getting long term visas without going back to the US? This depends a lot on the country. Like Mexico, well, okay, let me back up a little bit. Like, I was just watching something about Italian citizenship. I know in Italy, in Spain, if you start the visa process in those countries, actually probably going to be faster for you to get the visa versus you started in your home country at the consulate. Mexico has long had a history of no, you got to leave to start the visa process. Currently, Mexico has a program. I see Angel or Angel, I don't know, mentioned the RNE program. This will let you get residency in Mexico without leaving. There are some requirements about previous visits, some fines you have to pay, that sort of thing. Currently, right now in Mexico, that's the only way you can get residency without leaving if you are not related to somebody who's going to put you on their residency. But other countries do have situations where you can be in the country and possibly transition your visa into something else or start the visa process for a residency visa while you are there. Um, I will say this for Mexico, even if you go the traditional route, you don't have to go back to the US to apply for Mexican residency. Like when I applied for my residency in 2019, I could have done it in China. Mexico's requirement for the traditional residency route is that you apply outside of Mexico in a country you are in legally, and that could be as a tourist. You could be there to apply for your Mexican visa. They do not require that you go specifically to your home country. But there are some countries that are like, yes, in order to get this visa, you have to go to your home country um, to apply for the visa. So you have some options, but it's going to take a little bit of research because, of course, every country has their own rules. All right, y'all. Thank you for coming to hang out tonight. Um, remember, we are going to make sure that we don't get overwhelmed. We are still protecting our peace. I'm not going to tell you that we're protecting our peace for the next 4 years because they play a long game. We are protecting our peace from this point forward. So everybody take care of themselves. And hey, if you haven't had a chance to listen to the most recent episode of Flourish in the Foreign, featuring me discussing aging abroad, go do that. And otherwise, I will see y'all next time. Bye, guys.